Hey folks, when it comes to 8-bit computing in the 80s, compilations were one of those things that were essential for kids to get their hands on some of the big name releases without needing to wait for a budget re-release. So out of a lot of them, the one that's most special for me is this one, Action Extra. It's a compilation I first got with the 64 when I got mine off of relatives. And it's a compilation that's jam-packed with titles that provide sports action, space action, fighting action, and even some arcade action, all for your trusty C64. So, a plethora of different kinds of action for which should hopefully cover everyone's taste. Sounds like a recipe for a winner? Let's go fire the C64 up and see how those 8 games within fare after all this time. We start off this compilation by getting into a little bit of sporting action. And the first game for that is One Day Cricket from Melbourne House. As the title states, it's based around the limited overs format, giving you the option to play a match ranging from 30 balls to a full 300 balls in length. You can do that either by yourself, with the C64 taking the helm of the Commodore 11, or with another friend. Both players in 2-player mode will get to pick from one of a number of international teams, and while those teams feature real players, surprisingly how they got away with that, the differences are really only visual, represented by the colour of your batsmen's as you bat. And that sort of leads to gameplay, which is really only about batting. You position your batsman, you pull fire in a direction to hit the ball, and its timing and position will hit it to certain parts of the field or you'll get out. There's no bowling, no running, no fielding. So as a result, especially in 2-player mode, it suffers quite a bit. As you like that interactive tension, you're basically going after a runs chase. You're not stopping your opponent, you're just watching them go for it. It's simple enough for a bash now and then, but truthfully, if you want a sports game on the C64, there's far better alternatives out there. Our next pick from the sporting action is Electra Glide. In this fantasy racing epic, you're racing on courses representing the US, the UK, and surprisingly Australia, up against the clock. Rather than opponents or traffic, your obstacles here are a bunch of weird abstract things. Puddles, spinning cubes, bouncing spheres, and pylons. You score points based on how far you've travelled, so how far you've gotten through the game, but also you get additional points by navigating around the obstacles. If you crash into them, you slow down, lose a bunch of time, and you don't get as many points. Compared to other races that are on the C64, it's not really that frantic. You only face a single obstacle at a time as you're moving through these courses. Now, as a kid, I actually enjoyed this game a fair bit, but looking at it now, I think it's dated incredibly poorly. The graphics and music are very nice. Actually, the C64 is probably the nicest looking version out of the 3 conversions that got released, but the challenge, as it's more from the controls, which feel very sluggish despite having 3 different sensitivities available, but they're also compounded by just the clarity. When you're coming up to an obstacle, you think you've gotten in the right position to avoid it, but you don't really seem to. And that just takes a lot of fun out of the game for me. Now, we're on to our last piece of sporting action. And it's FA Cup Football 87. Let's just get it out of the way. This game is dire. And that's me just being polite about it. As you'd expect from the title, it's a soccer or football management game where you are tasked with picking a team to go for the cup. Unlike most management games, you can actually pick from 10 teams out of a pool of 120 something. And it's also for 1 to 8 players, so that means there's potentially 80 teams that are associated with a human player. And you can already see where this is going. That many teams, that many human players, means the gameplay just lacks any semblance of tactical play. You pick an attacking, defending, or balanced formation as the game prompts, which is at the start and at other points through the match. And then you just endure the tedium. The tedium of that timer counting up. And as it counts up, you just see match scores update. Even when you're seeing the final, the actual FA Cup final match, it doesn't get any more exciting. You sit back, watch the timer count up. There's a casual bit of commentary line now, and even a teeny little picture in the middle of the screen. but your existence just fades away watching those numbers go up and up. For me, this is the absolute turkey of the compilation. The tedium, the terrible presentation, and the lack of gameplay just make it not worth your time at all. And now it's time to leave the sporting action behind, because now we're headed into space with some space action. And our sole entry there is FTL's Light Falls. Light Falls is a vertically scrolling shmup in which you're tasked with taking your Light Force fighter out for a spin through 4 alien sectors filled with enemies, installations, and just clearing them out. Because as always, someone's got to do it, and it always falls down to a lone fighter pilot. Now, that results in a bit of a tough game. It's one of the toughest shmups I've played on the 64. But that tends to be the case for a lot of shooters from that era, so it's not really doing anything special there. But I should be honest, the fact that your player sprite is really large doesn't help this in any way. It adds up quite a bit. But despite that, don't let it turn you off. This is a game, it's still quite fun. It plays well, the controls are tight, and while it's a little bare bones with its thrills, and also has a very annoying high score entry, it's what I still enjoy now, going back to every now and then. Even more so when you look at the magnificent Rob Hubbard music. It provides a great background to the action, one that is definitely worth checking out. Things continue to get a bit better on the B-side, as we get into a bit of fighting action, leaving the space action behind, with the first of comic hero Dan Dare's computerized adventures in Dan Dare, Pilot of the Future. This time, perennial nemesis the Mekon has sent an asteroid on direct course for the Earth, and it's up to Dan to save the day, his team, by disabling the computers controlling the asteroids, and then ultimately stopping the Mekon. The gameplay involves exploring the asteroid, solving puzzles to get further in, making your way deeper, initially starting at the outer surface, descending into a prison complex where Dan's friends are being held, finally into the Mekon's lair, at least after you use the conveniently placed giant laser to take out the computers running the show. As a kid, I really got into this game. I never quite got to the end, but it was quite a good challenge to get quite a way in. And going back to it now, I think it still holds up really well. It's a well put together game. It plays well. It's a good length of time. It's not a really long game, but it fits really well, and it's certainly one of the better games in this pack that's worth checking out. Our second and last slice of fighting action continues with Melbourne House's Bazooka Built. This is another one of those titles I remember fondly as a kid, but like Electra Glide, seems to have dated really badly after all this time. Now, it's a horizontal run and gun game in which you fight your way through a number of levels. One of those little ticks in its level design is that you need to move up and down. You can't just run from right to left along the bottom. You got to move up and down between sections to actually advance the level. And it's something that you struggle to get your head around when you're playing it as a kid for the first time. Now, you run through, you fight enemies, you collect weapons, and eventually you move on, moving from stages that are basic facilities to horizontal shmup stages where you're in command of a fighter blasting down enemy jets to the next island. And it sounds like it's good fun, but despite the generous amounts of energy they give you, and how easy it is to get extra lives, which you basically just have to defeat 100 enemies, you always feel overwhelmed. The enemies don't attack in patterns, they just come as like a bunch on screen. And the way they attack means that you don't really feel like you're clearing them out effectively, and your default fist weapon just doesn't help all that much. So, it feels like survival isn't due to your skill, but rather just luck of the draw in actually being able to fend these enemies off. It's a bit of a shame, but the design flaws in that really accentuate that feeling of datedness that I talked about earlier. But on top of that, it's incredibly glitchy, and I remember back in the day having to load it up 2 or 3 times, as even though it loaded successfully, you just get a tile screen full of flickering mess, and even getting into later stages, just graphics would start glitching out. But the music's kind of nice though, so it's good, it's worth it. It's not enough to save it. Time to say bye-bye to the fighting action and hello to the arcade action with Wiz. And that's yet another Melbourne House release. And this one, you're a wizard who's tasked with saving the magical isle from the oncoming darkness. Pretty much classic fantasy trope there. To do that, you need to fight your way through the marauding hordes, level up to becoming a glorious 5th level wizard, and then learn the spell that will separate the magical isle from the dark places. Now, you wander through the light and the dark realms in order to collect ruins. You also buy and upgrade your spells, which you need to be able to effectively deal damage and survive, and all in an attempt to survive long enough. So while you avoid monsters, rival wizards trying to stop you, but more importantly is the Tracer that'll stalk you if you're waiting around too long to explore. Now, as a kid, this is what I never really understood. Not having the instructions in the copy I had back then just really didn't help. And it looks like a Gauntlet clone on the surface, but there's a lot of that undercover depth that really adds to the game. And when you start out, the sluggishness of movement and a few other things it doesn't explain itself too well, and you get really confused and defeated really easy. So you're doing a lot of plays that you just end really quickly because you don't know what the heck is happening. But the thing I found is going back to it now for this review, there is that depth, and there is that little bit of gameplay that makes it intriguing. As despite the sluggish controls, that depth really makes it a lot more interesting compared to other games of its period. Now, it's time to close out the compilation, as our final piece of arcade action is Palace Software's The Sacred Armor of Antiriad. Said armor being a lost piece of high-tech hardware from the days before humanity happened to nuke itself back into the Stone Age, as you kind of expect from a lot of games from the mid-80s. So, the remnant Earth is slowly recovering, society's forming, it's fairly primitive, and it's invaded by a bunch of slimy alien scum, who have basically enslaved humanity. And you're Tal, and your job is to locate this lost armor, upgrade it to its full battle capabilities, things like anti-grav boots, cannons, and a big bomb, and use it to breach the aliens' base, to deliver this bomb, and end their reign once and for all. It's not an easy quest, as you jump through the flick screen environment, find energy tanks to keep your suit operational, collect the pieces, deal with the radiation that's still lingering around, and try to survive the obstacles to get between you and the aliens complex. It's a tough game, and it tends to be a tad short, as if you know what you're doing, you can breeze through it pretty quickly. But it's really well put together, it's challenging, it's fun to play, and it certainly can lay claims to being an action-packed title for this compilation. Naming a compilation probably isn't always the easiest task when it comes to naming software. And honestly, Action Extra does not live up to its name. Out of those 8 games, my standouts are Dan Dare, Sacred Armor of Antiriad, and Light Falls. Dan Dare is a challenging arcade adventure. It's really nicely presented. It has a good length of gameplay that you can try to get a decent play session in, but not feel like you can get progress lost if you do mess up. Antiriad is not the longest of games. Again, if you know what you're doing, you can beat it in about 15 to 20 minutes. But the challenges in exploring that map to find the pieces, getting all the way through to the alien fortress at the top, is still a good challenge, and it plays very well and is tightly put together. And as for Light Falls, it certainly isn't the best shmup you're going to find on the C64. But it's a game where the sum of its parts come together really well to create a challenging, polished game. It's a great reflex test, it's a good challenge, it's got some great Hubbard music in it. What more can you want? And as I said earlier, the turkey without a doubt is F8 Cup 87. And that's not just because it's a management game, it's just such a tedious one. They're not really what you think of when you think of an action pack for games. But you're staring at static screens with very little information. You have very little tactical input into the gameplay. Most of the time you're just sitting there holding down the spacebar to speed the clock up. And it is the digital equivalent of watching paint dry. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, please consider leaving a thumbs up and a comment. They do help. It helps in building the word and getting more people interested in what I'm doing here. If you enjoyed it, thanks again for doing so. Thanks again for subscribing. And I'll catch you next time.